The funniest jokes are the ones that turn out to be true. The lunch crowd at Parker's Diner was loud enough to drown out almost any conversation. Plates clattered. Coffee machines hissed. A country song played softly from an old speaker near the kitchen. Emma Carter moved through the busy room with practiced speed, balancing 2 plates in one hand and a coffee pot in the other. At 27, she had mastered the art of smiling through chaos. Regular customers greeted her by name. Truck drivers filled the counter seats. Office workers occupied the booths near the windows. It was just another Thursday afternoon in downtown Chicago, or at least it seemed that way. Table 7 sat near the back corner. The same table, the same customer. For nearly 3 months, a man had been coming in every Thursday at exactly 1 o'clock. He always ordered the same thing: turkey club sandwich, black coffee, no dessert. He sat alone, read a newspaper, and tipped generously without drawing attention to himself. Emma knew very little about him. His name was Benjamin. He wore simple clothes, sometimes jeans, sometimes a button-down shirt. Nothing flashy, nothing remarkable. He looked like the kind of man who spent more time thinking than talking. That afternoon, Emma approached with a fresh cup of coffee. "Refill?" she asked. Benjamin looked up from his newspaper and smiled. "Please." Emma poured the coffee. "Anything else?" Benjamin hesitated. For the first time since she had known him, he looked slightly nervous. "Actually, yes." Emma raised an eyebrow. "That sounds serious." A faint laugh escaped him. "Maybe it is." She waited. Benjamin folded his newspaper and set it aside. "Would you like to have dinner with me sometime?" Emma blinked. For half a second, she thought she had misheard him. Then she laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a nervous laugh. A genuine laugh that escaped before she could stop it. The customer at the next table glanced over. A truck driver at the counter looked up from his pie. Emma covered her mouth, still smiling. "You are serious?" Benjamin nodded. "I am." That only made her laugh harder. "That is the funniest thing I have heard all week." Benjamin sat quietly, neither offended nor embarrassed. His expression remained calm. Curious, almost. Emma finally caught her breath. "I am sorry," she said, still grinning. "It is just unexpected." Unexpected is not always bad. Maybe not. She placed the coffee pot against her hip. "But you barely know me. I know enough to want dinner." Emma shook her head. "That line probably works better than you think." It has actually never worked before. That answer surprised her. It sounded honest. Still, she smiled and stepped backward. "Well, today is not your lucky day, Benjamin." "No. No." She pointed toward the crowded diner. "Besides, I have enough trouble managing these customers." Benjamin laughed softly. "Fair enough." Emma walked away, still smiling to herself. Around her, the diner returned to normal. Orders were called. Coffee was poured. Conversations resumed. Yet something about the exchange lingered. Because while everyone in Parker's Diner thought the man at table 7 was just another customer, nobody knew that before the week was over, his face would appear on every television screen in America. The next morning began like every other morning in Emma Carter's life. Her alarm sounded at 6 o'clock. She pulled on a sweatshirt, tied her blonde hair into a loose ponytail, and stepped into the cool Chicago air carrying a paper cup of coffee from the corner store. The city was just beginning to wake up. Delivery trucks rumbled through downtown streets. Office lights flickered on inside tall buildings. For most people, Thursday's awkward conversation had already disappeared into the background. For Emma, it lingered only as a mildly amusing memory. She smiled to herself while unlocking the front door of Parker's Diner. Benjamin had seemed nice enough. Quiet, respectful, maybe even charming. But life had taught her not to build castles out of small moments. Rent was due next week. Her mother's physical therapy appointment was scheduled for Monday. The old sedan she drove made a new noise every time she started the engine. Reality occupied far more space in her mind than romance. By 7 o'clock, the diner was alive. The breakfast crowd filled booths near the windows. Coffee cups moved constantly. Orders echoed from the kitchen. Emma slipped naturally into the rhythm she knew so well. She greeted regular customers by name, refilled drinks before anyone asked, smiled through minor complaints. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest work. Around 10:30, her coworker Lisa burst through the swinging kitchen doors carrying her phone. "You need to see this," she announced. Emma barely looked up while organizing menus. "If it is another cat video, I am busy." "It is not a cat video." Lisa sounded unusually serious. Just look. Emma glanced toward the screen. A business news channel played silently. A reporter stood in front of a massive corporate headquarters. Behind her appeared the image of a familiar man. Emma froze. The menu slipped slightly from her hand. She took the phone, looked again, then looked closer. The man on the screen was Benjamin. The same Benjamin who ordered turkey club sandwiches. The same Benjamin who sat at table 7 every Thursday afternoon. The same Benjamin who had asked her to dinner less than 24 hours earlier. The reporter's headline filled the screen. One of America's most influential business leaders announces major national expansion plan. Emma blinked. Wait. Lisa grinned. Exactly. Emma stared at the image. Expensive suit. Professional photographs. Television cameras. Corporate logos. Everything about the broadcast felt disconnected from the man she thought she knew. That cannot be him. It is definitely him. Lisa zoomed in. Emma, that is your table 7 guy. The diner suddenly felt quieter, even though the noise around her had not changed. Emma watched the report continue. Billion-dollar projects. National recognition. Interviews with governors and industry leaders. None of it made sense. Benjamin had never mentioned any of it. Not once. He had spent months sitting in the corner booth reading newspapers and drinking black coffee, as if he were the most ordinary customer in Chicago. Why would somebody like that eat here every week? Lisa asked. Emma did not answer, because another question had already formed in her mind. If Benjamin had hidden something that big, what else did she not know about him? For the rest of the day, Emma struggled to concentrate. Every time she poured coffee or carried plates across the diner, her mind drifted back to the television screen. The image refused to leave her thoughts. Benjamin standing beside governors. Benjamin speaking at national business conferences. Benjamin shaking hands with people whose names appeared in newspapers. It felt impossible to connect that version of him with the quiet man who spent Thursday afternoons reading a newspaper in booth 7. By closing time, the entire diner had become obsessed with the story. Customers brought it up. Employees discussed it. Even Mr. Parker, who normally cared about nothing except inventory and payroll, spent 20 minutes reading articles online. You turn him down? Lisa asked for at least the 10th time that day. Emma wiped down a table and groaned. Yes. A billionaire. Apparently. And then you laughed. Emma pointed a cleaning cloth at her friend. I am beginning to regret telling people that part. Lisa laughed. Chicago is full of women trying to meet someone like that. That is exactly why this is ridiculous. Emma tossed the cloth into a bucket. I did not know who he was. Would you have said yes if you knew? The question stopped her. For a moment she considered it seriously. Then she shook her head. Honestly, I do not know. That answer surprised even her. Because despite the headlines, despite the money, despite everything she had learned, what bothered Emma most was not that Benjamin was wealthy. It was that she suddenly realized how little she understood about him. Later that evening, she sat in her small apartment helping her mother organize medication bottles at the kitchen table. The apartment was modest but comfortable. Family photographs lined the walls. A small radio played softly in the background. Her mother looked up from the newspaper and smiled knowingly. You have been distracted all day. Emma sighed. Everyone keeps talking about him. The businessman? You saw that too? Half the city saw it. Her mother folded the paper. He seems successful. Emma laughed softly. That might be the understatement of the year. Her mother studied her carefully. Are you embarrassed? Emma considered the question. No, then what? She stared out the window toward the city lights. I think I am confused. Across Chicago, Benjamin Reed sat alone in a penthouse office overlooking Lake Michigan. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected thousands of lights stretching across the city skyline. Reports covered his desk. Messages filled his phone. Invitations arrived every hour. Yet his attention remained on something much simpler. A memory. Emma laughing. Most people would have found the moment humiliating. Benjamin did not. In fact, it was the first honest reaction he had received in years. Nobody at Parker's Diner knew who he was. Nobody treated him differently. Especially Emma. She never cared about influence. Never asked for favors. Never looked impressed. That was exactly why he kept returning. Benjamin glanced at the clock. Nearly 10 o'clock. Tomorrow was Friday. He normally never visited the diner on Fridays. This time, however, he found himself wondering whether Emma would look at him differently now. And for reasons he could not quite explain, he hoped the answer was no. Friday arrived with a steady rain that painted the city in shades of gray. Water slid down the diner windows while customers hurried inside, carrying umbrellas and damp jackets. Emma had spent the entire morning telling herself she was not curious. Not curious about Benjamin. Not curious about whether he would return. Not curious about what she would say if he did. Unfortunately, the more she repeated those thoughts, the less convincing they sounded. Around noon, Lisa caught her glancing toward the front door for the third time in 10 minutes. "You are waiting for him," Lisa said. "I am not." You looked at the door again. Customers use doors. Lisa laughed and walked away. Emma rolled her eyes and returned to refilling sugar containers. Still, part of her wondered. By 1 o'clock, booth 7 remained empty. By 1:15, it was still empty. Emma felt strangely disappointed. She immediately became annoyed with herself for feeling disappointed. Then, at exactly 1:23, the bell above the entrance chimed. Benjamin stepped inside carrying a black umbrella. The conversations nearest the door slowed. A few customers recognized him immediately from television. One man whispered to his wife. Another pulled out a phone. Benjamin seemed not to notice. Or perhaps he simply did not care. He folded his umbrella and walked toward booth 7 as though nothing had changed. Emma watched from behind the counter. For a moment, neither moved. Then she grabbed a coffee pot and headed toward his table. "Turkey Club?" she asked. Benjamin smiled. "You remembered. You make it easy. Black coffee. Always." Emma poured the coffee. The familiar smell drifted between them. For a few seconds, everything felt almost normal. Then Benjamin looked up. "You saw the news." It was not a question. Emma nodded. "Hard to miss." "And?" She considered her answer carefully. "I think you left out a few details." A faint smile crossed his face. "I suppose I did. Most people mention owning multiple companies at some point. Most people ask." Emma laughed despite herself. The tension eased slightly. Around them, the diner slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Benjamin glanced toward the window where rain streaked the glass. "You seem surprisingly calm." "Should I not be? Most people react differently once they know." Emma studied him. "Is that why you never told me?" Benjamin looked down at his coffee cup. For the first time since she had met him, he seemed genuinely uncertain. "Maybe." The answer lingered. Honest. Unpolished. Emma found that she respected it. "Well," she said finally, "for what it is worth, I still think asking out your waitress was a terrible strategy." Benjamin laughed. A real laugh this time. The kind that reached his eyes. Several nearby customers glanced over in surprise. "That is fair." Emma smiled and started to walk away. Then Benjamin spoke again. "So nothing changed?" She paused beside the table. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the diner seemed to hold its breath. Emma looked back at him. "I did not say that." And as she returned to the counter, she realized something uncomfortable. The mystery was no longer who Benjamin Reed really was. The mystery was why she suddenly wanted to know more. Over the next several weeks, something unexpected happened. Benjamin kept returning to Parker's diner exactly as he always had. The same booth. The same sandwich. The same black coffee. The headlines continued following him everywhere else. But inside the diner, he seemed determined to remain the man Emma had first met. At first, she assumed it was temporary. Maybe he enjoyed the novelty. Maybe he wanted a break from corporate life. Yet week after week, nothing changed. One Thursday afternoon, a black luxury sedan stopped outside the diner. Several customers immediately turned toward the window. A well-dressed executive stepped inside carrying a leather portfolio and approached Benjamin's table. The entire conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Documents were signed. A brief handshake followed. Then both men left the booth area as quietly as they could. The moment the executive disappeared, Benjamin returned to reading his newspaper as though nothing unusual had happened. Emma walked over carrying a fresh pot of coffee. That looked important. Benjamin glanced up. It was. "You signed papers worth more than this building, did not you?" A smile appeared. "Possibly." Emma shook her head. "And then you went right back to reading sports scores." "The Cubs are having a surprisingly good season." She laughed. Somehow conversations with him had become easier. Less awkward. More natural. The surprise was not that Benjamin was wealthy anymore. The surprise was how little he seemed interested in talking about it. One evening after work, Emma stopped at a small neighborhood grocery store near her apartment. As she pushed a cart down an aisle, she noticed a bulletin board near the entrance covered with community announcements. One article caught her attention. A local youth center had received funding for a new after-school program. Another article mentioned scholarships for low-income students. A third highlighted grants for struggling small businesses. The same name appeared quietly at the bottom of each article. Reed Foundation. Emma recognized it immediately. Later that night, curiosity led her down an internet rabbit hole. Sitting at her kitchen table beside a cup of tea, she began reading. Scholarship programs, community centers, housing initiatives, disaster relief projects. Millions of dollars directed toward causes that rarely attracted national attention. The more she read, the more confused she became. None of these stories appeared on the business channels. None of them generated headlines. Yet they seemed to matter deeply to the people involved. Her mother noticed the stack of articles spread across the table. Research project? She asked. Emma hesitated. Maybe. Her mother smiled knowingly. The businessman again? Emma looked down at the papers. I thought I knew who he was after the television interview. And now? Emma leaned back in her chair. Outside, city lights shimmered beyond the apartment window. Now I think I only knew the smallest part. Meanwhile, across town, Benjamin stood inside a renovated community center preparing to leave after a fundraising event. Children played basketball in a newly restored gymnasium. Parents gathered near folding tables. Nobody treated him like a celebrity. Most of them simply knew him as someone who showed up. As he walked toward the exit, an elderly volunteer thanked him for coming. Benjamin smiled and wished her a good evening. Then he stepped into the cool Chicago night. What he did not know was that somewhere across the city, Emma was beginning to ask a question she had never considered before. If Benjamin had hidden his success so carefully, what else about him had she completely misunderstood? Autumn settled over Chicago with crisp air and golden leaves drifting across downtown sidewalks. The city seemed quieter somehow, or perhaps Emma simply noticed more now. Ever since discovering the work connected to the Reed Foundation, she found herself paying attention to stories she once would have overlooked. A renovated playground, a scholarship recipient interviewed by a local newspaper, a struggling bookstore that managed to stay open after receiving support. Small victories, quiet victories, the kind that rarely appeared on national television. One Saturday morning, Emma volunteered at a neighborhood food drive organized by a local community center. She had promised Lisa she would help for a few hours before heading home. The gymnasium buzzed with activity. Volunteers carried boxes. Families chatted while waiting in line. Children laughed near a basketball court. It felt ordinary in the best possible way. Emma was arranging canned goods on a folding table when a familiar voice behind her said, "You are full of surprises." She turned around. Benjamin stood there wearing jeans, a navy jacket, and a baseball cap. No cameras. No assistants. No security detail. Just Benjamin. Emma blinked. "What are you doing here?" He glanced around the room. "Volunteering." She laughed softly. "Of course you are." Benjamin smiled. "What about you?" Same answer. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The setting felt strange. Not because either of them seemed out of place, but because this was the first time they had met somewhere other than the diner. There were no menus. No coffee refills. No familiar routines. Just two people standing in the middle of a crowded gymnasium. Throughout the afternoon, they worked side by side. They packed food boxes, helped elderly residents carry supplies to their cars, organized donations. The conversations came naturally, easier than Emma expected. Benjamin asked about her mother. Emma asked about a recent foundation project. Neither mentioned business rankings or wealth. As the hours passed, she noticed something important. Nobody treated Benjamin like a billionaire. The volunteers gave him the same tasks they gave everyone else. At one point, a coordinator handed him a broom and asked him to clean a storage room. Benjamin accepted without hesitation. Emma watched the scene with quiet amusement. "You know," she said later, "most executives would probably delegate that. Most executives are smarter than I am." "I doubt that." Benjamin looked toward a group of children playing basketball. "Maybe. But I spent a lot of years thinking every problem could be solved with money." Emma followed his gaze. "And now?" He was quiet for several seconds. "Now I think people matter more." The answer stayed with her long after the event ended. That evening, Emma drove home beneath a sky painted orange by the setting sun. For the first time, she understood why Benjamin had never rushed to explain himself. The television interviews, the headlines, the success. None of those things represented the person she had spent the afternoon with. And somewhere between carrying boxes and sharing ordinary conversations, Emma realized she was no longer curious about how much Benjamin Reed was worth. She was becoming curious about something far more dangerous. Whether she was starting to genuinely like him. The weeks that followed felt different. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just different. November arrived with colder winds sweeping through Chicago, and somehow Benjamin had become a regular part of Emma's thoughts. She noticed it during ordinary moments. While pouring coffee at the diner. While waiting at traffic lights. While helping her mother fold laundry on Sunday afternoons. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. Benjamin never pushed. Never pressured. Never tried to impress her. In a world where people constantly advertised themselves, that alone felt unusual. One Thursday afternoon, the diner television switched to a breaking business report. Several customers glanced toward the screen. Emma happened to be carrying a tray of coffee when she looked up. Benjamin's company logo filled the display. The reporter explained that a major project had encountered unexpected problems. Financial analysts debated the consequences. Commentators speculated about losses that could reach hundreds of millions of dollars. The room buzzed with opinions. Yet what caught Emma's attention was not the numbers. It was Benjamin's face during the interview shown on screen. He looked tired. Not defeated. Just tired. Later that evening, she expected him to cancel his usual visit. Most executives probably would have disappeared behind boardroom doors. At exactly 1 o'clock the next day, however, the bell above the diner entrance chimed. Benjamin walked in carrying a newspaper beneath his arm. Several customers recognized him immediately from the news coverage. A few whispered. One man openly stared. Benjamin ignored all of it and headed toward booth 7. Emma approached with a coffee pot. "Rough week?" she asked. Benjamin smiled faintly. "You saw that? Half the city saw it." He nodded. "Then you know more than I do." Emma poured coffee into his cup. "That bad?" "Depends who you ask." She studied him for a moment. There was no self-pity in his voice. No frustration. Only honesty. "Will everything be okay?" Benjamin looked out the window where gray clouds drifted across the city skyline. Eventually. The answer seemed simple, yet Emma sensed the weight behind it. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Benjamin surprised her. "Can I tell you something?" Emma leaned against the booth. "Sure." He looked down at the coffee cup between his hands. "The reason I never told you who I was had nothing to do with secrecy." Emma waited quietly. For years, every conversation started the same way. People knew my title before they knew my name. They knew my companies before they knew me. His voice remained calm. After a while, you stop knowing whether people actually like you or just like standing near success. Emma felt something tighten inside her chest. Benjamin gave a small laugh. "Sounds pathetic when I say it out loud." "No," her response came immediately. "It sounds lonely." Benjamin looked up, really looked at her. The noise of the diner faded into the background. For a brief moment, neither seemed aware of anyone else in the room. Then a customer called Emma's name from across the diner. The moment passed. She picked up the coffee pot and smiled. "I should get back to work." Benjamin nodded. "Of course." Emma walked away carrying the empty pot, but his words followed her. Because for the first time, she was no longer seeing the billionaire behind the headlines. She was seeing the man behind the billionaire. And that distinction was beginning to matter far more than she expected. December arrived with the first snowfall of the season. Chicago rooftops turned white overnight, and holiday lights appeared in shop windows across the city. Parker's Diner felt warmer than usual. Customers lingered longer over coffee. Familiar songs drifted from the speakers. Life seemed to slow down just enough for people to notice what mattered. Emma noticed it too. Over the past few months, Benjamin had become part of her routine in ways she never expected. Not because of his success. Not because of his reputation. Because whenever he walked through the diner door, the room somehow felt a little calmer. One Thursday afternoon, shortly before Christmas, the lunch crowd finally thinned. Snowflakes drifted past the windows while Emma wiped down the counter. Benjamin sat in booth 7, finishing his coffee. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Familiar. Then Benjamin folded his newspaper and looked up. "Can I ask you something?" Emma smiled. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether it is another terrible strategy." Benjamin laughed. "Fair concern." He placed the newspaper aside. "Do you remember what happened the first time I asked you to dinner?" Emma immediately laughed. Unfortunately, yes. I figured. He nodded toward the window where snow covered the sidewalk outside. I have been thinking about that day. That makes one of us. I doubt that. Emma felt her cheeks warm slightly. She focused on arranging sugar packets. Benjamin watched her for a moment before speaking again. The funny thing is, I never regretted asking. She looked up. Even after I laughed at you? Especially after that. The answer caught her off guard. Benjamin leaned back against the booth. Because it was honest. Outside, traffic moved slowly through falling snow. Inside, the diner felt unusually quiet. Benjamin took a slow breath. So, I am going to try again. Emma froze. Not dramatically, just enough to notice her own heartbeat. Benjamin smiled. Emma Carter, would you like to have dinner with me? The question hung between them. Simpler than the first time. No audience. No expectations. Just honesty. Emma looked at him carefully. Months earlier, she had seen a customer sitting alone in a diner. Then she had discovered a billionaire. Later, she had discovered a philanthropist. Eventually, she had discovered something far more important. A man who genuinely listened. A man who showed up. A man who cared about people when nobody was watching. She realized she was smiling. You know, she said softly. That question sounds a lot different now. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. Is that good? Emma pretended to think about it. Maybe you finally improved your strategy. Benjamin laughed. The sound filled the booth with warmth. For a moment, neither said anything else. Snow continued falling beyond the windows. Holiday lights reflected against the glass. Then Emma met his eyes and gave the answer he had waited months to hear. Yes. Benjamin blinked once as if making sure he had heard correctly. Yes. Yes. Her smile widened. I would love to have dinner with you. For the first time since Emma had known him, Benjamin looked completely speechless. And somehow, that made the moment even better. The first dinner lasted nearly 4 hours. Neither of them noticed. Outside the restaurant, Chicago's winter evenings settled across the city while conversations flowed as naturally as breathing. They talked about childhood memories, favorite books, embarrassing first jobs, and places they hoped to visit someday. For the first time, there were no diner counters between them. No television headlines. No assumptions. Just two people learning who the other really was. As weeks turned into months, something even more meaningful happened. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would ever appear on the front page of a newspaper. Benjamin continued showing up for community events. Emma continued helping her mother and working at Parker's Diner. Life remained wonderfully ordinary. Yet somehow, ordinary felt extraordinary when shared with the right person. Spring arrived once again. One bright Saturday afternoon, Emma stood outside the diner watching customers come and go. The city felt alive. Trees along the sidewalks carried fresh green leaves. Warm sunlight reflected from nearby buildings. Behind her, the familiar sounds of the diner drifted through the open doorway. Benjamin approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. Not from an expensive cafe. Not from a luxury hotel. From Parker's Diner. He handed one to her. I thought this seemed appropriate. Emma smiled and accepted it. You finally developed good taste. Benjamin laughed. That took longer than I expected. They sat together on a nearby bench overlooking the street. People passed by without paying much attention. Exactly the way Benjamin preferred. For several minutes, they simply watched the city move around them. Then Emma looked at him. Can I ask you something? Of course. If I had known who you were that first day, would you still have asked me out? Benjamin thought about it carefully. Probably not. Emma looked surprised. Really? He nodded. Because then I would have spent the entire evening wondering whether you were talking to Benjamin or talking to a headline. The answer made her smile. After a moment, she said, then maybe it worked out exactly the way it was supposed to. Benjamin looked toward the diner window where booth 7 was visible in the distance. The same booth where everything began. Maybe it did. Silence settled comfortably between them. Not an awkward silence. The kind that exists when two people no longer feel the need to fill every moment with words. Emma took a sip of coffee and watched a family cross the street together. Benjamin followed her gaze. The future remained uncertain. Life always was. There would be challenges ahead. Unexpected turns. Difficult days. But neither seemed concerned about that. Because the strongest foundations are not built on admiration. They are built on understanding. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the city, Emma remembered the day she laughed when a quiet customer asked her to dinner. Back then she thought the joke was the invitation itself. Now she understood the truth. The real surprise was not discovering who Benjamin Reed was. The real surprise was discovering that the man behind the success was far more valuable than the success itself. And sometimes the people worth knowing never lead with their accomplishments. They simply sit down, order coffee, and wait for someone to see them clearly.